Okay, I'd like to make a quick video about evaluating your sources. And evaluation's all about determining how good your sources are for a given context. So one thing that's important to kind of keep in mind is that it's not so important that you find a lot of sources, it's that you find good high quality sources that are applicable to what you're trying to do. The first thing I want to address is this myth I think that we have of Google. And part of the myth is that if you type in a few words on Google and you get lots and lots of hits, then that means that you're done. That means you've got all you're going to need. And I think part of that comes from our own sense that the search bar, that Google search bar, right, that beautiful Google search bar, that somehow that search bar at this moment, before I start typing, that's sort of a representation of my own informational omnipotence. I am godlike in my information at this point. I can type any kind of search I want and I will get information immediately. So let's say I'm going to type in, because I'm writing a paper on Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper. So Gilman, Yellow Wallpaper, I have to spell it right. And essay. Now you'll see that what I get here is 410,000 results. That's a lot of results. But as I look down this, you'll see some of the initial things I'm getting here. 1, 2, 3, help me, free yellow wallpaper essays. I'm getting papers that are essentially student papers that are written for other classes. And the reason why I wouldn't want to necessarily go to these is that they're not going to add much authority to my own work. Even something like this that says it's from Prof Essay, which is either professional or professor maybe. This is an essay that might be interesting, but there's no sense of who it's from or what kind of authority this writer has. And so going to a paper like this as a source for my own work is going to end up not really adding to the authority of the work that I'm doing. Sometimes we might go to something and say, oh, well, it's got a .edu on it, so that must make it better. And if I click on that, as I'm reading this, this is a model essay, which means that, again, it's an essay written by a student that's meant to be a model of the kind of essay that you might do, but it is not ultimately an essay that you'd want to reference as an essay that adds authority to your work. And I would caution you against looking at model essays because it becomes very, very easy to start mixing up what you're doing and what model essay writers are doing. And that's a surefire way to wind up with plagiarism in a paper. So instead of kind of just feeling like Google's the way to go, I've got a second video that's showing you how to begin your search on the library databases to look at some more academic sources. As you're thinking about evaluating sources, I think it's useful to have a definition of what information literacy really is. And information literacy has been defined by the Association of College and Research Libraries as the set of skills that's needed to find, retrieve, analyze, and use information. And it's that literacy that helps us to avoid what David Shank has titled data smog. So that 410,000 pieces of data that are sitting out there, that's a lot for you to kind of sift through. And so you need some tools for defining, what is it that makes one of these good and one of these not so good for a given context. So let's talk about the quality. And again, I want to make clear that as I'm talking about quality, quality is relative. It's relative to the applicability of the situation. So, for example, finding a source like a review on Amazon for a product may be very applicable to my deciding whether I want to buy that product. But referring to that review on Amazon for, say, a book in a research paper about that book would not be a good use of a resource for that particular setting. So any source could be a good source given the right context. So one thing I want to look at is timeliness. So my example of this, whether the world is flat or not is no longer open to debate. So if you're finding flat earthers out there trying to make arguments about the earth is flat, that information can be useful for trying to figure out what's going on sociologically with people not being convinced by science. But it certainly is not useful in any kind of scientific debate, because there is no debate on whether the world is flat. No scientific debate. Another example of that, the timeliness of a source in many fields, what is known is what is known right now. So, for example, in geology, it used to be thought up until pretty recently, up until the kind of the middle part of the last century, that there was sort of this cake batter theory of how mountains form and valleys form. And the idea was that they understood that there was heat coming up from the core of the planet. And so the working thesis was that heat pushes mountains up, and where it's cool, it's going to drop down into valleys. But then there was a paradigm shift that got better data, better science, and now we know that there's these plates that we're all riding on, and that mountains are formed either when the plates crash together and push up, or they're formed when one plate slides beneath another one, potentially causing more heat to push up volcanoes. And it's possible that that paradigm may shift again. Paradigm just means the kind of the accepted groupings of thoughts around a particular subject, and those paradigms, the overall way of thinking about things, the fact that we have the word shift to go with it means that it is possible that our understanding may change over time. And so what we know is what we know now, particularly in newer sciences or sciences where there hasn't been as much time for research. So, for example, psychology, we talked briefly earlier in the quarter about psychoanalytic criticism, and many of the thoughts that went into how the brain worked, how personality worked, all those sorts of things at the time of Freud have since been debunked. It doesn't mean that what Freud said was bad or wrong for his time. It's just that newer evidence has disproven that. And so the timeliness of a document can be important on your writing. That said, if you're writing about literature, if you're writing about Hamlet, which was written 400 years ago, the comments that somebody made about Hamlet 200 years ago may still be relevant. What might have changed is the timeliness of the conversation. What's interesting about Hamlet might be different now to critics than what was interesting a couple of hundred years ago. Another thing you need to be worried about as you're kind of evaluating your sources is, can you understand it? If a source is great, but it's written in such a way that you have no idea what it's saying, it is not useful to you. And can you get it? And can you get it in time? So if a source is great, but it's only located at the University of Bowling Green, and you don't have time for an interlibrary loan, it's not a source for you. So as you're thinking about what makes a good source for a particular project in school, finding sources that you feel you can understand, finding sources that you have access to, and that you can make use of. That's why starting research projects as early as you can will give you time potentially to begin to understand the conversation. So if you find a source that's tricky, you can approach instructors, you can approach tutors that can help you to better understand what's going on with a source. Or if you find a source that you don't have immediate access to, starting your research process early means you might be able to take advantage of something like interlibrary loan, where you can get books from basically any library in the country and even certain libraries overseas. Those take time to come to you. You want to be thinking about the author. Can I rely on this author? Is this author an authority on this particular topic? And this is maybe the one thing that I think is maybe easiest to kind of grasp. If you're finding a source and you cannot say who the author is and can't kind of work out why that particular author would be a appropriate author to reference, it's kind of like referring to some guy on the bus that you talked to and who seemed really knowledgeable and that told you the government's run by lizard people. Or, if you're referring back to a student paper that was posted online as if it's a high quality source, it's essentially like turning to your peer in class and saying, hey, what did you think about this story? And then quoting that peer as if that peer is then an authority. One place where this often becomes an issue is with wikis, in particular Wikipedia. And you've probably heard that you shouldn't use Wikipedia for college papers. And I want to give you just a really quick demonstration of this. So if I go to Wikipedia, the first thing about Wikipedia that I want to note is that there's nothing inherently bad or wrong about Wikipedia. It is an encyclopedia. Encyclopedias generally are not good sources for academic papers because they give you essentially pre-digested information. The idea of an encyclopedia is to pull together the top level of information for you so that you can just have that kind of quick information. It's not to give you any kind of in-depth information. The nice thing about Wikipedia, though, is that because Wikipedia is produced by the entire internet, everybody who accesses Wikipedia has the ability to edit Wikipedia. So, for example, if I type in Grays Harbor College, and I go to the Grays Harbor College webpage, you'll see that there's an edit button on every one of these sections. So if I wanted to, if I saw something in here that I didn't think was correct, I could click edit. And I could start editing. So Grays Harbor College, a community and technical college, was conceived in 1929 by a group of angry Aberdeen citizens. And I can just add what I want to this. Now, usually the additions are not malicious, but they could be. It's possible that somebody could go through and edit the Grays Harbor College webpage because they go to Centralia College and want to make Grays Harbor College look bad. The reason why Wikipedia thinks of itself as relatively reliable, then, even though anybody can edit it, is that the idea is that if people are visiting the site and see that somebody has done something malicious, they will then fix it or fix it back. Some pages on Wikipedia have even been locked down for that reason. So, for example, if I was to look up Martin Luther King Jr., you'll see that I don't have edit rights. Now, if I found something on here that was incorrect, and I'm a King scholar, there's a way for me to submit those changes, but you would have to go through some sort of a review process. But again, the reason why we say don't go to Wikipedia for your academic work is that there's no clear authority here. There's no clear sense that somebody is always in charge of these pages. And those who are in charge may not have specific authority in a relative or in a given field. Now, the beauty of Wikipedia is that you get entries on obscure things. So if I type in the Legend of Zelda, I get a entry that is incredibly long. So the internet likes Legend of Zelda. Um, and this only happens because many people are uh, posting into this, editing this, adding to this. Even this one has gotten locked down because probably somebody maliciously was trying to say things about Legend of Zelda. Okay, so I hope that's enough said on Wikipedia. Not a bad source, but not a source you want to use for your academic work. So if you're thinking about how good a source is, I want you to be thinking about kind of the quality of the source itself. So on this kind of line, at the lowest end of authority is web sources. They could be great, but they also can be something that anybody can post. That doesn't make it bad. It just means it doesn't necessarily have authority. We move a little bit closer to authority potentially with newspapers and general readership magazines. Those have what's called editorial control. And editorial control means that for a newspaper, you don't get citations in there. What you get is reporters submitting their work to editors. The editors make sure that the reporters have good sources, and then they go to print. Now, that works if the newspaper has a reputation that it cares about. So, for example, the New York Times calls itself the newspaper of record. And for the New York Times, if they publish something that turns out later to have been false, um, they can get in trouble with their readers, and their readers might not think that they have the same kind of reliability. And so when they publish something that they find out is false, they're usually pretty quick to publish retractions, to publish corrections, because they care about whether or not people think that what they're reporting is correct. Now, a newspaper or general magazine like National Enquirer, as you walk down the aisle at the grocery store, you'll see all kinds of crazy stories on there. And essentially, nobody's going to think that the National Enquirer is less reliable for having posted a story that turns out not to be true, because in the first place, nobody thought that the things that were in there were always true to begin with. So again, their reputation helps you to know whether or not that information can essentially be trusted. Within newspapers, too, you want to watch out, because there is a difference between something that's been posted as editorial content or content by opinion writers and things that are posted as news. Slightly higher on the scale than of reliability is what we call a peer-reviewed magazine or journal. And peer-reviewed magazines or journals, these are typically called academic journals. What that means is that a group of peers, so people who are who have similar qualifications to the writer, have reviewed what the writer is saying and have basically said, not that what the writer is saying is right, but that at least the writer is following some kind of accepted practices. So, for example, the Journal of American Medicine, JAMA, if a study is published in JAMA, before the study even proceeds, the authors of the study will have to submit, their research methodology, how they're going to conduct their research, to JAMA. Other doctors and researchers read what they're doing and give them feedback, tell them, yeah, what you're doing makes sense. It looks like a research project that will lead to results that can be relied on, or they might give them feedback that says you need to do this or that to make the study worthy of publication. And then once they do their study, they publish their results. And again, doctors or researchers in that field take a look at what they've said and determine whether or not best practices have been followed, whether or not the research was done in an accepted kind of format. Potentially the highest quality sources are books, for a couple of reasons. Because for one, an academic book is often put through some sort of review process. not always, but often. Um, a book also will have information that, because it's slow to come out, information that might be more thought through. That said, we do live in a time now where books can be published pretty much instantaneously. If you wanted to go write a book, you can have it published tomorrow for free using the Amazon Kindle store. It'll be an ebook, and Amazon will take a cut if you want to charge for it, but it is possible now for people to publish very cheaply. So this has the potential to be the most reliable, but it's not necessarily the most reliable. So again, I hope what I'm trying to kind of get across here is the thought process that goes into thinking about reliability, thinking about whether or not this is a good source and a reliable source. What you don't want to do is say to yourself, I have no idea, whether this is reliable, but I'm going to use it anyway because I feel like I have to use something. You want to be thinking through what makes it an appropriate source. In our class, then, I'm going to be asking you to do some source evaluation, and in that source evaluation, I'm going to ask you to think through the timeliness, the authority, all those sorts of things. Let me know if you have questions.